A long, long time ago, in the golden city of Babylon, there lived a king named Nebuchadnezzar. He was the greatest king of his time, ruling over a vast empire that stretched far and wide. Babylon was the jewel of the ancient world, famous for its grand palaces, mighty walls, and hanging gardens, a wonder that people talked about in hushed admiration. Nebuchadnezzar had built much of it with his own hands, or so he thought. Now, Nebuchadnezzar was not just a king, he was the king. No one dared to question him. His word was law, and his power was absolute. But there was one thing about Nebuchadnezzar that God could not ignore: his pride. Nebuchadnezzar believed everything he had achieved was by his own strength and greatness. He never gave credit to the one true God who had allowed him to rise to such power. God had been patient with him, but he knew it was time to teach Nebuchadnezzar a lesson he would never forget. Nebuchadnezzar had already experienced God's power, but he still didn't fully learn his lesson. One night, he had a terrifying dream of a giant statue made of gold, silver, bronze, iron, and clay. The statue was destroyed by a rock that turned into a mountain, filling the whole earth. None of his wise men could interpret the dream, but a young Jewish man named Daniel, who worshipped the God of heaven, explained it. The dream was a prophecy. Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom, the golden head, would one day be replaced by other kingdoms, and ultimately, God's eternal kingdom would triumph over all. Even though Nebuchadnezzar was impressed and honored Daniel's God, he didn't change his ways. Instead, he became more stubborn. Later, Nebuchadnezzar built a huge gold statue and commanded everyone to worship it. 3 young men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, refused because they worshipped the God of Israel. Furious, Nebuchadnezzar threw them into a blazing furnace. But God delivered them. When Nebuchadnezzar saw that they walked unharmed in the fire with a mysterious fourth figure, an angel or God himself, he was amazed and praised their God. But again, he didn't fully surrender his pride. Now we come to the main story. Nebuchadnezzar had another dream, even more unsettling than the first. This time, he saw a massive tree in the middle of the earth. Its branches stretched to the heavens, and its leaves were beautiful. Birds nested in its branches, and animals found shade under it. Everyone on earth benefited from this tree. Suddenly, a messenger from heaven shouted, "Cut down the tree. Strip it of its leaves and branches. Let the animals scatter. But leave the stump in the ground, bound with iron and bronze. Let it stay there until 7 times pass over it. Let him lose his mind and live like an animal, eating grass with the beasts of the field. This will happen so that everyone will know that the Most High rules over all the kingdoms of the earth." Nebuchadnezzar woke up in a cold sweat. He summoned Daniel to interpret the dream because he trusted Daniel's God-given wisdom. When Daniel heard the dream, he was troubled. He didn't want to give Nebuchadnezzar the bad news, but he spoke honestly. "Your Majesty," he said, "the tree represents you. You have grown great and strong. Your empire reaches to the heavens, and all people depend on you. But because of your pride, God is going to humble you. You will be driven away from people and live like an animal. You'll eat grass like cattle, and your body will be drenched with the dew of heaven. This will last for 7 years until you acknowledge that the Most High God is the one who gives power to kings." Daniel urged Nebuchadnezzar to repent, stop sinning, and show kindness to the poor. "Perhaps," he said, "God will show you mercy and delay this punishment." For a while, Nebuchadnezzar seemed to take Daniel's advice. But as time passed, his pride crept back in. A year later, as he stood on the roof of his magnificent palace, overlooking the city of Babylon, he said to himself, "Is this not the great Babylon I have built by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty?" No sooner had the words left his mouth than a voice from heaven interrupted him. "Nebuchadnezzar, your kingdom has been taken from you. You will be driven away from people and live like an animal. This will happen until you acknowledge that the Most High rules over the kingdoms of men." Immediately, Nebuchadnezzar lost his mind. He left his palace and wandered into the wilderness. He lived among the animals, eating grass like a cow. His body was soaked with the dew of heaven because he had no shelter. His hair grew long like eagle's feathers, and his nails became like bird's claws. The great king who once ruled an empire became like a beast. 7 years passed. During this time, Nebuchadnezzar lived in utter humiliation, but God had not forgotten him. At the end of the appointed time, Nebuchadnezzar finally lifted his eyes to heaven and acknowledged the Most High God. He said, "Now I praise and glorify the King of heaven, because everything he does is right, and all his ways are just. Those who walk in pride he is able to humble." When Nebuchadnezzar humbled himself, God restored his sanity. He returned to his palace, and his kingdom was given back to him, this time with even greater glory. But Nebuchadnezzar was no longer the proud, arrogant king he once was. He had learned his lesson. He spent the rest of his life honoring the God of heaven.